Hello and welcome to Reputation Matters, a show about corporate reputation, how companies face crises, weathered them, resolved them, and the key learnings from all of this for our viewers. My guest, as always, Mitu Samar, founder, Eminence, a strategy consulting firm. Mitu, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Anupam.
Today's episode is actually quite interesting. It's about employee action. Now, employees are one of the, if not the most important asset to any organization. And what we're going to talk about today is about episodes or crises or whatever you want to call them that hit at the center of employees within an organization. We've got two episodes or two case studies that we're going to discuss today. One is on TCS and the other is on Cobra Post. I think both are probably about 10 years apart, if not more.
Yeah.
So
actually.
let's start with TCS, one of the largest, I think, IT firm in India, at least by market cap, and one of the biggest firms for the Tata Group as well.
True.
And it was shaken by a pretty large scandal that happened just about last year, 2023. Let's start from there.
Yeah, it's an organization that employs more than 6 lakh people, you see, and for the organization to realize and know that one employee is somewhere in some department doing something which is against the Tata Code of Conduct is certainly difficult, Anupam. But organizations need to really know and understand that, they are made up of people, right? An organization is nothing without its people. So employees are very, very integral part of the organization, and at every step, they have to keep reinforcing the overall code of conduct that employees need to follow, the best practices that in their areas of work that they need to have. And Tata's being an organization which is so many, decades old, that it doesn't really, it definitely has set of practices which very clearly outlines what is the employee code of conduct, what is the ethical behavior that they're expecting. Yet,
with all of this background,
yes,
yet this happened.
This
it's
happened.
Important for you to realize, for our listeners, viewers, to understand the background and the backdrop to what exactly happened. Please go on.
Correct. So somewhere in the early 2023, the company received two whistleblower complaints talking about the fact that a certain section of the HR team, the resource management group, they are favoring some vendors, some agencies who again provide manpower skills. Again, to set some context, so of course the company has their own employees, etc. But more importantly, sometimes they need specific skill sets or people in large bunches. So in such cases, they do rely on outside agencies to supply, right kind of talent. So these kind of talents are called BAs, business associates, and it was alleged that some segments or some employees of the RMG group were supporting or favoring some outside agencies in return of, again, some favors. And so they received this whistleblower complaint, so again, some news was leaked out, there were conversations, they were very quick to take action on it. But that was the genesis of this whole episode.
And the company's internal response was that an investigation was launched. 19 employees were actually found guilty. 16 of them were separated from the company, and the balance were removed from the resource management group. Is that what happened? So in your view, what was the company's response to something so serious? Because I assume this was the very first time, and TCS is a very old company. They've been around for quite some time.
Correct.
The practices have also been going around for quite some time. This is probably the first time that they got whistleblower complaints. Could you just walk us through what was the company's response?
So, like any responsible company, they immediately put internal investigation in place with senior members in the group, and they did carry out this investigation. Of course, they informed the board, they informed all the responsible authorities, all that. Additionally, they also hired an external agency or auditor to also look into the case. And eventually, it was observed that yes, there were some people who were guilty, and like you pointed out, actions were taken against them. Actions were taken against these agencies also. They were immediately removed. The company also issued a statement, and they said that there was no financial implication of this development. There was no impact on the earnings of the company as such, but definitely the reputation of the company come under question, and that's the sad part, because the Tata Group is known for ethics and their code of conduct, so they took it very, very seriously.
The one thing that stands out to me in this episode is that the chairman actually issued a statement, and he
went on to say that I'm pained to see something like this happening, which is for, again, a chairman of his stature to come out in public and accept this, talk about this, and clearly express his disappointment. Was definitely a clear indication that they have taken it very, very seriously, and corrective actions internally have been taken around that. And it also sent a great message to the entire organization. I would say not just TCS, but the entire Tata Group, that we don't take things lightly. And you cannot think that you're just a small fish in a large sea and hence you can get away with whatever action. There are ways and means to capture that, and if there is even a whiff, we will act responsibly.
I want to ask you something about controlling the narrative, because the next episode that we are going to be talking about out here also deals with very large companies. Okay, so when it comes to brands and firms like them, controlling the narrative is an important part. How do you think that the Tata Group, TCS, controlled the narrative out here in terms of the action they took, the communications they did? What's your view on that?
They definitely took very prompt action, like I pointed out, Anupam. But opinion about how did they take control of the narrative is divided.
Yeah. Okay.
And in fact, I've had conversations with variety of people, because it was the most talked about case in that point in time. And some people felt that the way they have come out and expressed all that is fantastic. But there were some segments who did believe that the whole communication could have been better shaped, more forward-looking statements also could have been added, that what are they going to do about it in future,
so because that something like this does not repeat.
That it doesn't repeat, right? Because it's human nature. You can't control greed, but what will you control is the framework in which you're operating, and that aspect, that what are they doing going forward, could have been spoken a little more clearly.
Yeah. So some positives and negatives from this. I think those are the key learnings. Mitu, let's go to the second episode now. Very interesting, very scandalous, I would say, because when this came out back in the day, it caused a sensation everywhere. I mean, then this Cobra Post was known for their stings, right?
Correct.
Sting operation that happened. This time around, the sting that they did was on money laundering in large banks. Okay, can you just walk us through what happened here? Yeah.
In fact, I was just that time I used to work in an organization as an employee, and I was just walking in the corridor, and we used to have TV screens put up everywhere. And suddenly you're seeing, ICICI Bank name coming, HDFC, Axis, too much, loud screens everywhere, and it just caught attention that suddenly what happened. And then we get to know that there is this, non-profit news body called Cobra Post, new website it is, which carried out a sting operation on some of the employees of these three banks. And there they kind of undercover customers they went as, and then they requested them to convert their black money into white. So they were asking options, and very, very swiftly it was shown, at least on screen, that And the employees were saying that, oh, we can invest this kind of cash into investment products or into Benami accounts. So a lot of, hard-hitting visuals that kept coming out regularly, and put all the three banks under huge scrutiny. In fact, RBI also investigated them for the same.
So headlines were flooded because this was a sting
Absolutely.
operation. If I remember correctly, this was before the era of social media, but there was 24/7 news channels.
Correct.
And they relentlessly went on with it. It's a hit to the reputation of these
Totally.
large banks.
And it was not that social media was so this was in 2013 14, sometime around that. So some social media had started becoming active, of course, not like today.
Yeah.
But it had started with, like, Twitter at that point in time was like
it was there, but not as popular as it is today.
Precisely. And so it was making headlines even in these platforms. But that point in time, TV viewership and the large screens across organizations
Stands out,
used
right?
to be.
A lot of companies, a lot of organizations do have TV screens installed within their offices, and if you're like in your case, an employee, you would see them.
Correct.
What were the responses from the banks? Okay, we know that the RBI got engaged, and of course they did their job, which is they launched their own investigation over and above the banks. Okay, what were the responses from the banks?
So banks also launched their own investigations. They also immediately issued what we call in our parlance holding statement. And that's again one quick digression from here, but a strong recommendations to all organizations that whenever crisis hits you, do evaluate issuing a holding statement. Not every time that you'll have to issue it, but be mindful about it, that should you issue a holding statement, because that acts as an interim, ointment, so to say.
What you're saying is the choice between remaining silent
Precisely.
and issuing a holding statement.
Correct. One should definitely evaluate that, right? It could be an interim response, acknowledging that yes, we know something like this has happened and we're looking into it. It can just simply say that.
And in some cases, it's mandatory with the listing agreement with the exchanges.
Precisely. Yeah.
Please go on. Yeah.
So it's important that they come out with it. It just settles the consumers, customers, employees, shareholders, everybody. So all the three banks were swift enough to issue statements. But what really stood out for me was the statement that ICICI Bank issued, because they were very clear with two things. All the three banks acknowledged that something like this has happened and they're working on it. All of them talked about the great practices that they have. In such cases, you need to reinforce messages, but then, we should not make such events as a sales tool. So talking about, while the whole screen is showing that there is something major that has happened in your organization, and then you are saying that, oh, we follow best practices, there is a conflict, right, that appears. So again, organizations need to be mindful of the tone. Don't get hyperbole and say that, oh, we follow best practices unnecessarily. You can just simply say that we follow all the practices, and we've acknowledged whatever has come our way and we are working on it. So which is what all the three banks did. But more importantly, if you look at the way ICICI Bank issued its statement, it not just said that we're looking at it, but they also said about the investigation that they have launched, and also the timeline by when they will come back.
Okay.
Right? So it gives people some, visibility.
What were the consequences of this, right? Because this would have gone on for a while, investigations for long. What came out of it?
So some employees, in fact, were suspended, etc. as well, right? So employees were suspended. RBI, when they did their own investigation, they did not find a case of money laundering.
Okay.
But they did find a case of, not following the processes as well as they should have been. And hence, employees were penalized, banks were penalized, and they all paid the penalty. But then it's not just the money that penalty that they paid, right? It's the reputational penalty also that they had to pay. But I am quite certain that they learned great lessons from it, and would have definitely tightened their systems and processes, especially at branch levels, because it's very difficult for organizations to sit at the head office and keep track. But you have to keep track. You cannot say that, this was in far end of the country and hence we did not pay attention.
Okay.
It has to be like, every branch, and especially when you're such a regulated entity, in such cases, every branch, every employee action has to be very, very closely scrutinized.
Okay, Mitu, with TCS, we saw that they controlled the narrative. There were some positive views, some negative views about how they handled it. What about this specific episode? What are the key learnings for it for our viewers?
From both the episodes, I would say that the important aspect to always remember is come out in a very clear, cohesive manner with your side of the story, especially when the crisis is of this scale. It's not necessary to always issue a statement, right? Because unnecessarily sometimes you tend to rather add fuel to fire by issuing statements. So one has to be very mindful. But crises of this scale certainly deserve a holding statement initially to first control the minds of public at large, and then with a clearer going forward kind of approach, because organizations, there are two things involved here, right? A, the scale of crisis, which was very, very large and hence needs to be addressed accordingly. Second, the kind of organizations themselves, they are role model organizations, right? So they have to also act like role model. So we've acknowledged that this crisis has happened. We've dealt with it like this. Going forward, these are the three things that we'll be doing to plug the gap. So very clear communication around that. So that if crisis happens, that must be done. But before that, crisis shouldn't happen. So very important that all organizations, and especially because these are listed entities, large cases, there are systems and processes. But then there are organizations which are smaller and they may or may not have this level of systems and processes. Very important for them to have very clearly defined code of conducts. Very important. It might just seem like tick in the box, but important to tick that box. So please do a quarterly or a 6-monthly, first and foremost at an induction level also, employee training in terms of what is the framework within which you will operate and you cannot cross this, right? So that has to be drilled down. There are roles like chief ethics officer. A lot of times people do question that, what's the role? Maybe it's not very obvious the advantages of such roles. But in today's day and age, where information flow is in seconds, plus unlimited platforms, right? Extremely important to have these compass-led roles, and chief ethics officer is one of the popular roles which is now coming out in the large organizations, and one should invest in it. And finally, there should be some kind of mystery shopping that should be done. So organizations should very consciously, undertake activities with some front-facing employees, with respect to what is their conduct when they are, faced with a certain situation. And that will give them a lot of insights. Right. So something what we call in our parlance mystery shopping or mystery audits, so to say, where they don't know that we are representing or we're doing some kind of an audit. We act like a vendor, we act like a customer, and go about and engage with the employees of the organization and see and observe their behavior. And that really helps organizations get good signals where, people are getting out of the framework and act accordingly.
These are great preventive tools.
Yeah.
When the crisis hits, brushing it aside is not a strategy.
100% no.
Just like silence isn't.
Correct, exactly. Brushing it aside is certainly not a good idea to ever do, Silence, however, sometimes works in your favor, especially when there's a regulator involved. So you rather engage with a regulator than issuing public statements and keep talking publicly about it. Instead, I would recommend organizations adopt silence in such cases publicly, but engage actively with regulators.
I want to wrap this episode with a final point on trust. Now, trust and reputation goes together. Okay, let's talk about that from the perspective of the fact that for banks, trust is the cornerstone, the foundation of any relationship they have with any customer.
Correct.
You just help us out here, as a takeaway for our viewers, why trust goes along with reputation. And once either of them is broken, it's very hard to. Let's talk about that for a while.
I would say trust is the most integral part of reputation. If there is even slight damage to this quotient, there is no reputation at all. So there are two integral elements when we engage with our various stakeholders talking about reputation. Two very, very important ingredients. Number one, experience. How does one feel when one engages with you as an employee, as a customer, as a vendor, as an investor, any stakeholder? What is the experience that one is carrying back with them when they choose to engage with you? And second is the trust, right? That experience, is that leading in a comfort zone or a trustworthy zone with you or not? And if you ever see that either of the two, are not meeting 100 on 100 kind of a score, there is a challenge. You may be highly trustworthy, right? But if you're not leaving a great experience, and that reminds me, in one of the episodes, we will be covering Tata Motors as the case, that who doesn't trust the brand Tata? Most of us do. But because their product at a point in time did not live up to the customer expectation, the experience quotient got damaged, and that's where their reputation as a great car maker came under question. They immediately corrected it though.
They did,
yeah. And then that whole experience plus trust equation fitted well, and the reputation is impeccable.
Folks, that is it. Experience and trust. That is a wrap on this episode of Reputation Matters. My guest, Mitu. Mitu, thank you so much for doing this for our viewers.
Pleasure always.
Thank you.